Mr. Seahorse by Carle. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. "It's time for me to lay my eggs," she said. "Can I help?" said Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, yes, thank you," said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. "I'll take good care of our eggs," said Mr. Seahorse, "I promise." As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in the reeds. 1, 2, 3, and 4. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Stickleback?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Delighted," said Mr. Stickleback. "I just built a nest, and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs onto it. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch. Keep up the good work, Mr. Stickleback." As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Tilapia?" asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know," said Mr. Seahorse. "Mrs. Tilapia has laid her eggs in your mouth, and now you are taking good care of them until they hatch." Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. "You must be very happy," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a pair of leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Curtis?" said Mr. Seahorse. "Perfectly fine," replied Mr. Curtis. "Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and now I've stuck them on my head. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You are doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As he drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Couldn't be better," said Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe has laid her eggs along my belly, and I will take care of them until they hatch." "You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Tip-top," said Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs are hatched. Now I'm babysitting." "You are doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. The time had come for the seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse twisted and wriggled this way and that, and at last the babies tumbled out of Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse, "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own."